The sky is overcast. Not a sliver of sun breaks through the thick churning clouds. The sea stretches endlessly, cold and gray, whispering the kind of silence that precedes something dangerous. Waves slap against the sides of a long ship alone. In the middle of the North Atlantic, no compass, no map. Just an old wooden vessel guided by wind, stars. And something far stranger. According to modern logic, this journey shouldn't be possible. Viking ships crossed thousands of miles of open sea centuries before the invention of the magnetic compass in Europe. Yet somehow they found Iceland, Greenland, even the distant coast of North America. In storm or fog, these explorers almost always stayed on course. How? A single translucent stone, no bigger than a loaf of bread, might hold the answer. A sunstone, scientists once dismissed it as myth. But deeper dives into Norse sagas and one startling shipwreck discovery have forced a serious rethinking of Viking navigation. What if this magic crystal wasn't legend? What if it was real and incredibly advanced? The answer is hidden. In the clouds, buried in a wreck, and tucked inside an ancient story no one thought to take seriously. If curiosity is already glowing like a stone in your mind, take a moment to subscribe to the video sharing channel and let the longship sail. Deeper dot, there are no stars tonight. No landmarks. Just mist, memory, and a shimmer of light that shouldn't exist. A Viking longship sails west from the fjords of Norway. The year is 870. The captain squints at the sky. No sun. Just that damp gray fog that clings to skin and soul alike. But he reaches into a leather pouch, pulls out something crystalline, and lifts it to the sky. He turns the stone slowly. It catches the faintest light and glows along one edge. He points, gives a low order. The helmsman nods. The prow adjusts. They stay on course. The crew doesn't question it. They trust the stone. They trust that something ancient and invisible is guiding them. No compass. No map. Just unstone. Today, the scene sounds impossible. But archaeological clues and a series of strange passages in Old Norse texts suggest this wasn't imagination. It was innovation. For centuries, historians believed Vikings used only the sun and stars to navigate. True enough on clear days. But when the skies turned angry, how did they manage such consistent precision over hundreds of miles? The legend of the Sunstone first appears in an Icelandic saga written in the 13th century, describing a character who, in cloudy weather, held a sunstone up and saw where the sun was in the sky. The passage reads like fantasy. For generations, it was treated as such. Then, in 2013, something surfaced that challenged everything. Divers exploring a 16th century English shipwreck near Alderney recovered an oddly shaped crystal. At first, it looked like debris, but chemical analysis revealed something peculiar. The object was calcite of the Tia, mineral known for its unusual light-bending properties. This was the same crystal type, suspected of being the legendary sunstone. The same kind that could polarize light even in overcast conditions, and it wasn't alone. Other Viking Age sites yielded fragments of cordierite and tourmaline minerals with similar optical effects. Suddenly, the legend had evidence, not just in story, but in stone. It wasn't magic. It was physics. A calcite sunstone works by exploiting polarized light. When sunlight scatters through the atmosphere, even on cloudy days, it becomes partially polarized. The crystal detects the direction of this polarization. By rotating the stone and watching how light behaves inside it, especially in a double image, it's possible to locate the sun's position with surprising accuracy. Some reconstructions suggest accuracy within a few degrees. Others claim even better. In 2007, researchers conducted real sea tests using replica sunstones and Viking-style techniques. They achieved navigation accuracy comparable to early magnetic compasses, but the Vikings had no scientific language for polarized light. They had seafaring instinct, oral tradition, and raw experimentation. They didn't need to know why it worked, only that it did. In that world of gray skies and endless water, any tool that showed even a hint of direction became sacred. Historians still debate whether the sunstone was widely used across the Viking world or only by select navigators trained in its subtle art. Some argue it may have been ritualistic. Others suggest it was an elite secret, guarded like gold. One theory proposes that sunstones were passed from mentor to apprentice, never shared beyond the ship's inner circle. That would explain their absence in widespread burial sites. Another idea, they simply degraded over time. Calcite is soft. It cracks, dissolves, vanishes in salt water. Even the sagas, carefully preserved oral histories, mention it just once. But that one mention burns bright, because the very idea that a civilization over 1,000 years ago might have invented a method to see the sun when it's invisible, that's not fantasy. That's frontier science, and that's just the beginning. The waves grow taller, the wind sharper. The longship creaks beneath the strain as it punches through the dark sea like a spear through wool. A squall rises without warning. Rain lashes the deck. The horizon vanishes. The world is now only motion, water, and instinct. This should be where the journey ends, but it isn't. The helmsman holds steady. A sunstone glows faintly in the navigator's hand. There's no panic. Only precision, one ship, one stone, and the quiet, steady trust that they're going the right way. This isn't fiction. It's a story whispered through centuries and now revived by wreckage, rock, and reason. A Viking voyage like this one was recorded in a saga of uncertain authorship. But the tale lingers. A ship caught in mist and confusion until the navigator, soaked to the bone, lifts a crystal skyward and calls out the sun's location. He is neither sorcerer nor priest, just a man with a strange stone and ancient training. The story ends not in disaster, but in landfall. And the ship's survival, according to the saga, hinged on the sunstone. Modern scientists have tested this scenario in real-world conditions. In one experiment, researchers simulated various skies using polarizing filters and cloud models. When they held up calcite, the double image inside the stone would blur or shift as it rotated. At just the right angle, a dark cross or pinpoint shimmered, revealing the hidden sun dot using only this visual cue. They plotted courses with an error margin of less than 5 degrees. Enough to cross an ocean. But how did this knowledge begin? Some believe Viking navigators trained through generations in a form of observational learning. Apprentices studied wave patterns, bird flight, sea color, and yes, the hidden dance of the sun through stone. Instruction may have begun as early as childhood. A boy watching his father steer the ship might see the strange crystal come out in clouded weather. He'd hear no explanation, just observe the gestures, the corrections, the tilt of the wrist. Over time, those gestures would become instinct, and the stone would become sacred. Unusual? Absolutely. But not impossible. Cordierite and tourmaline, both found in Nordic trade routes, also display strong pleochroism, shifting color depending on light direction. Vikings might not have known the words, but they understood patterns. A slightly bluer flash when turned this way, a sharper shadow when turned that dot with enough repetition. The body learns what the tongue cannot explain. One reconstructed voyage attempted a full Norse route from Norway to Greenland. The modern crew, using only sunstones and traditional ship designs, completed the journey in 2 weeks. They encountered 2 major storms and 4 fog banks. They never lost direction. Even the experienced sailors were surprised. What began as a curiosity project quickly turned into respect. One crew member reportedly said, "It feels like the stone knows." Historians still debate whether this tool was standard gear or rare artifact. The lack of written records frustrates clarity. Some scholars argue that if sunstones were so vital, more explicit references should appear in the saga's dot, but consider the Viking worldview. Not everything sacred was spoken aloud. Navigation wasn't just a science, it was a kind of spiritual practice. A gift of the gods, perhaps, or a private craft passed down only to the worthy. Tools that worked became part of the soul. You didn't need to explain them. You just used them, and you guarded their mystery. The idea of crystal navigation feels futuristic. And yet, there it is glimmering on the deck of a 1,000-year-old ship, wrapped in a leather pouch, held in calloused hands. Unusual still that this knowledge might have been lost. Or was it? Some suspect that sunstones continued to be used by Nordic fishermen and traders long after Viking expansion faded. Only the language changed. Instead of sunstone, they might have called it sky eye or storm lens. Oral knowledge morphs fast. What doesn't change is the light. That stubborn, golden shimmer piercing the gray. A shimmer that says, "Keep going." The land is near. The oddity of it all lingers like sea spray on cold skin. A civilization with no written charts, no clocks, no GPS. And yet they found new worlds again and again because of a rock, not because it pointed north, but because it whispered light through the dark. The crystal turns gently in rough hands, a flicker, a double shadow, then stillness. One faint glow marks where the sun hides. That single point becomes direction, becomes motion, becomes survival. Long before satellites blinked from the heavens, before compasses swung in tiny boxes, a Viking stood on the deck of his ship and read the sky not with eyes alone, but with stone. Among those stones, 2 names echo through modern research: calcite and cordierite. Not just pretty crystals tucked into jewelry, but minerals with optical powers that still puzzle the curious. Calcite, often called Iceland's spar, is the prime suspect in the sunstone theory. Colorless, clear, and easily split into thin slices, it exhibits strong birefringence. Hold it over an image, and it doubles the lines. This isn't trickery. It's light splitting, refracting, trying to reveal something deeper. When rotated in sunlight, even faint or scattered, the calcite changes subtly, just enough to guide. Cordierite, on the other hand, offers something different. In strong light, its deep blue-violet hue shifts when viewed from different angles. Sailors who handled it might have noticed the color turn more vibrant when pointed toward the hidden sun, like a secret signal from the sky. Vikings didn't analyze refractive indices. They didn't write papers, but they noticed patterns in color, brightness, the way a stone gleamed or dulled depending on how it was held. And that was enough. Historians still debate whether calcite or cordierite was the original sunstone, or whether both were used at different times and places. Some propose that each had specific purposes depending on the voyage length or weather. Others argue that it wasn't the material, but the technique that mattered. What's stranger is how these stones may have traveled. Large deposits of both minerals lie scattered across Scandinavia. Iceland, in particular, is rich in calcite. That's why the term Iceland spar became common. Trade routes could have easily transported chunks of the crystal to shipbuilders or sailing guilds. And if stones were too fragile to pass through generations, the knowledge of how to use them surely wasn't in one curious find. A calcite crystal was discovered in an ancient monastery ruin near the Norwegian coast. Tucked beneath a collapsed wall, it bore scratches and smoothing, perhaps from years of handling. Archaeologists couldn't confirm its use, but the location and wear hinted at something more than decoration. Modern tests add layers to the story. In a 2011 study, a team set out to determine whether sunstones could work during nautical navigation, not just in theory, but in unpredictable, real-world skies. They used a boat, deliberately sailing through overcast weather, holding stones skyward every hour. The test revealed that even under thick clouds with only diffuse light, the crystals could detect solar polarization and estimate direction within plus or minus 5 degrees. That's not just good for the time. That's exceptional. Enough to cross from Norway to Greenland without ever seeing the actual sun. But there's another layer. Polarization patterns vary with latitude. Near the Arctic Circle, sunlight filters through the atmosphere at sharper angles, making polarization more pronounced, even on cloudy days. In other words, Viking territory may have been ideal for this technique. In the north, the stone spoke louder. That's not coincidence. That's environment shaping innovation. Some researchers speculate that this technique wasn't just an accident. It may have been deliberately refined. That the Norse figured out the best times of day, best angles, best types of clouds for reading the sky. That their calendars and sailing seasons revolved not just around weather, but around light behavior. It's possible that sunstone navigation was just one piece of a larger optical toolkit, combined with knowledge of bird migration, wave height, watercolor, and wind. The stone added precision to intuition. Even stranger, in several Norse settlements, symbols resembling twin circles have been found carved into stone. Some believe these might represent the double images seen through calcite. Visual cue sailors memorized. Academic debate flares over such interpretations. Are they sunstone diagrams? Ritual symbols? Decorative art? Historians still debate whether the Vikings truly understood the physics or if they simply trusted a tool that worked. Either way, the stone shimmered. And ships arrived. No lighthouses guided them. No glowing buoys. Only that faint, ghostly light inside a crystal, telling a sailor everything he needed to know. Odd, perhaps, that such a mighty seafaring empire might have depended on something so small, but that's history's secret. Sometimes the world turns on quiet things, a crystal, a shadow, a course set through fog that leads, somehow, always to land. Water stretches endlessly in every direction. No sun, no stars, only the dim smoky light of a cloud-covered sky. Still, the ship glides forward as if pulled by memory. The navigator holds the stone once more, angles it against the light. The glimmer confirms the heading. No course correction. Just quiet confidence. The kind earned by generations. The science seems new. But the instinct is old. To modern eyes, it's baffling. To Viking sailors, it was routine. 1,000 years ago, Norsemen crossed one of the most dangerous stretches of sea on Earth, the North Atlantic, using nothing more than sail, instinct, and tools as fragile as bone and crystal. And they didn't just reach new shores. They returned. One of the most remarkable feats of Viking navigation was the journey from Norway to Greenland. Unlike the coasts of Britain or France, Greenland offered no friendly landmarks. Its shores were jagged, unfamiliar, often obscured by ice and fog. One mistake meant wreckage, or worse, drifting endlessly into the frigid void. Yet by the late 10th century, Viking settlements were thriving there. How? Geographic reconstruction suggests a route that depended on clever use of the sun's arc, wave directions, and migratory birds. But in bad weather, none of that mattered. The only reliable clue was a patch of brightness in the clouds and a way to interpret it. This is where the Sunstone may have shown its true value. Modern experiments confirm that a sunstone can detect the sun's position even when it's 96% obscured by cloud cover. That's barely a whisper of light, but it's enough. When used correctly, the stone reveals a distinct line like a beam hidden inside the cloud itself. That line, once known, gives a sailor his bearing, and in open ocean, a bearing is everything. Odd, though, that the stone isn't mentioned more often in Norse records. Some sagas make vague reference to magic seeing stones or crystals of light, but nothing clear, no manual, no detailed description. Historians still debate whether this silence was due to secrecy or simplicity. Perhaps the knowledge was so common among skilled navigators that no one thought to write it down. Like tying a knot or setting a sail, it was done, not discussed. Others suggest that secrecy was the point. A ship's course meant wealth, trade, survival. If a navigator had a technique no rival understood, why share it? Why explain the crystal in your hand when others might follow you into a storm and not find their way out? That idea isn't far-fetched. In fact, it mirrors behavior across maritime cultures. Polynesian wayfinders guarded their own systems of star paths and ocean swells. Mediterranean captains memorized coastal silhouettes and taught them only to kin. Knowledge at sea was currency. Vikings may have done the same. What's more, sunstones had to be used with skill. A poor reading could throw the ship off course by dozens of miles. That could mean missing landfall entirely and never returning. So while the crystal itself was passive, its power depended entirely on the user. Training mattered. Some believe that Viking navigators practiced with the stones during twilight, when the sun's position was still visible. They'd test themselves, checking their readings against reality, learning to trust the shimmer and not their eyes. Others may have learned through oral riddles or chants that encoded the angles and turns. Even the act of using the stone likely followed a ritual pattern. One hand held it steady. The other turned it slowly, watching for the moment when light shifted. A whisper. A nod. A correction in the rudder dot in always, forward dot in 2002. An experiment by Danish researchers tried something bold, sailing a reconstructed Viking ship using only historical tools including a replica sunstone. Their conclusion? Navigation was absolutely possible. In fact, when paired with Norse sun compasses, simple wooden discs marked with shadow curves, the stone made long-distance travel not only plausible, but reliable, not perfectly precise. But precise enough to discover Greenland, precise enough to reach North America. 500 years before Columbus. The oddest part? All this might have happened without anyone ever calling it navigation. To them, it was simply what? Worked. No ceremony. No applause. Just another tool in a wooden world of sail and salt and sky. And when the ship reached shore, when land rose like a promise through the mist, there were no grand declarations, just the quiet satisfaction of direction honored, stone trusted, course kept. Somewhere off the coast of Greenland, the clouds split, but only for a moment. A faint column of light slants down like a ghostly stairway. The crew barely notices, too busy pulling ropes and steadying the sail. But one figure does. He raises the sunstone. The glimmer shifts just enough. He nods. They're still on track. No celebration, just a quiet, practiced calm. Another day at sea. Another small miracle. For centuries, such moments were dismissed as fiction embellishments in the old sagas. After all, how could a rock point to the sun when the sun itself is gone? Then came the sagas themselves. One of the most curious appears. In Raulf's Hatter, a short Icelandic tale involving the famous King Olaf and a mysterious farmer named Raulfur. During the king's visit, the skies are overcast. Olaf asks his host where the sun is. Raulfur lifts an object described only as a solarstein and confidently points to the sun's hidden position. The passage is short, barely explained. Yet that single line became the basis for one of the most hotly debated topics in Viking navigation history. Historians still debate whether the saga's author was describing an actual navigational method or simply adding a splash of magic to impress readers. Some suggest that sunstone is a metaphor, others insist it's literal, an echo of a technology too common to explain. But why mention it at all, if it were merely fiction? The timing of the tale's writing adds weight. Composed in the 12th or 13th century, it falls just after the height of Norse exploration. Memory was still fresh. Seafarers who had crossed to Greenland or Vinland may have still been alive, or their children were. These stories, though stylized, were shaped by real experience. It's also odd how matter-of-fact the passage is. No grand reveal. No flowery prose. Just, he held up a sunstone and found the sun. As if to the audience, that act needed no explanation. Another fragment appears in an even older text, Raffin's saga Svenbarnarsner. In it, a character uses a similar device to determine time by the sun's location, again barely elaborated. Again, treated as common knowledge. This recurring casualness may be the strongest clue. If something sounds ordinary in a story, chances are it was ordinary in life. Archaeologists find support in tools like the solar compass An artifact recovered from Greenland and dated to the Viking Age. It's a flat wooden disc with radial lines etched into it. When paired with the sun at a known height or even a sunstone, it can give surprisingly accurate directional readings. One odd twist: the design works best when sunlight is faint or filtered, not direct. It's as if the tool expects the sun to be hidden, a perfect partner to the Sunstone. In 2013, the so-called Alderney crystal found in a 16th century English shipwreck added a final piece to the puzzle. Though the ship was from a later era, the crystal was made of calcite. It had been stored near other navigation tools, like dividers and a pair of compasses. And though partially damaged, its clarity was unmistakable. A crystal with the same properties as Iceland's spar. Skeptics argued it might have been packed as cargo, not used for navigation. But its proximity to the captain's belongings suggested otherwise, and calcite's optical behavior, even degraded, remained functional. The oddity? No documents from that period describe its use, which echoes the Viking situation exactly. A useful tool, a powerful method. And yet, barely a whisper in written records, perhaps because it didn't need to be written. Perhaps because it worked best when no one asked questions. For the Vikings, storytelling wasn't about instruction manuals. It was about meaning. About memory. A man who held a sunstone didn't need to explain what it did. He only needed to get the ship home. That was explanation enough. So the stories don't linger on the crystal, but they linger on the voyage, the storms, the uncanny returns, the lands reached against all odds, all because, in the middle of nowhere, a piece of stone glowed where the sun didn't shine. Wind shrieks across the open deck, ice crusts the oars. The sea rears and groans beneath a dim sky that refuses to reveal the time of day. No birds, no stars, no horizon. The ship drifts at the mercy of a world gone white. And yet, in the midst of this freezing silence, the navigator reaches for the sunstone. It hasn't failed him yet. The glimmer is faint, barely more than a whisper of light splitting along the edge of the crystal. But it's enough. He adjusts the heading. The crew rows. They move forward toward nothing they can see but something they can trust. The deeper the method is explored, the stranger the science becomes. Sunstone use wasn't just an act of pointing and guessing. The process required understanding of light behavior so subtle, it would take centuries for modern science to explain. At the core of it all, refraction and polarization. Light, when it strikes the Earth's atmosphere, scatters. On clear days, it behaves in mostly predictable ways. But when clouds form or fog settles, sunlight filters and bends across billions of droplets, creating a polarized pattern invisible to the naked eye. Enter the calcite crystal. This mineral has the rare ability to show polarized light through double refraction. When a user looks through it, they see a doubled image. As the crystal rotates, one of those images grows brighter while the other dims. At a specific angle, precise to the sun's true position, the two images converge or intersect in a glow that marks the hidden source of light. No compass needle, no math, just sight and training. Modern researchers created experiments using these crystals in simulations of overcast, twilight, and stormy conditions. One surprising result: when used correctly, the sunstone not only located the sun's position, did so more accurately than some early magnetic compasses, which were notoriously unreliable on rolling ships. One strange benefit? Magnetic compasses are vulnerable to metal interference. Viking ships had none. But even still, a sunstone didn't wobble. It didn't swing. It didn't change based on cargo. It simply read the sky. Historians still debate whether this technology was developed intentionally or discovered accidentally. Was there a moment when a sailor lifted a shiny rock on a cloudy day and noticed something unusual? Did someone realize, after the 100th storm, that one crystal always seemed to glow when turned just right? That spark of curiosity could have sparked an entire tradition. From there, technique could be honed, passed on, practiced under various skies, remembered through chants or quiet rituals. One method believed to be used involved holding the crystal above a flat bowl of water. As the stone was turned, the double light refractions would dance across the surface like ripples of direction. Where the shimmer grew brightest, the sun waited. Oddly poetic, really. A glowing beam bouncing on water, guiding a ship through nothing. But the physical tools weren't all. Some Norse myths speak of gods who ride across the sky in chariots pulled by invisible horses, or spirits trapped in the light between day and night. Stories of sun fragments or sky mirrors pop up in early oral lore, often connected to guidance and fate. Were these metaphors? Maybe. Or maybe they were distorted echoes of something practical, a glowing crystal that revealed what the eyes could not. And yet, even with all this growing evidence, uncertainty lingers. One academic camp insists the idea of Viking Sunstone navigation is overstated. They argue that it's too convenient, that the sagas are vague, the artifacts rare, the connections speculative. Another camp disagrees. They point to experiments, field trials, even the fact that other animals like bees and certain birds use polarized light to navigate. If nature developed this skill without explanation, why not humans? And why not the Vikings? Especially a people so intimately tied to the sea, to wind, to the changing moods of northern light. To them, reading the sky wasn't science, it was survival. And perhaps that's why the Sunstone worked. Not because it was mystical, but because it was simple, reliable, and invisible to those who didn't know how to look. In the end, maybe the question isn't whether it existed, but how many times it saved lives without a word. Just one man, one stone, and a horizon no one else could see. The ship glides through dusk, the world painted in cold blues and silvers. The sun has disappeared, swallowed by thick fog, curling across the waves like breath from a sleeping giant. But direction remains, not from sound or sight or wind, but from the glint of a stone held skyward, steady in the hand of someone who knows how to listen to the light. This isn't magic. It's physics wrapped in legend. To the modern eye, the use of a crystal to locate the sun sounds almost whimsical. But step into the cold water of early medieval navigation, and whimsy vanishes fast. The North Atlantic, especially near Iceland and Greenland, is notorious for its low visibility, harsh weather, and sudden storms. A missed heading wasn't just a detour. It was death. Vikings didn't have backup plans. There were no lighthouses to guide them home, no flares, no lifeboats. If the ship was lost, it was lost entirely, and yet they sailed far. And often, that's why the Sunstone matters. It's not just an object, it's a key to understanding how a people pushed beyond the limits of their known world with tools that would make most modern sailors tremble. One of the most striking confirmations of this ancient method came from a modern recreation. In 2007, researchers used calcite crystals in combination with reconstructed Norse navigational techniques to test direction finding in heavy overcast. Their conclusion was both astonishing and simple. With training, a navigator using a sunstone could detect the sun's position with more than 90% accuracy, even when the sun was completely hidden. The key was learning how to read the crystal. Most people, when handed calcite, see a curious double image and think little of it. But to a trained navigator, that double image holds secrets. When rotated slowly against the sky, especially near morning or dusk, the brightness contrast reveals the angle of light polarization. That angle doesn't just hint at the sun's location. It marks it, and there's more. The Vikings also used a trick involving the sky's own light patterns, known today as the Haidinger's brush. It's a faint yellowish bow-tie shape that the human eye can sometimes detect when looking at polarized light through certain filters. Most people don't notice it, but under proper conditions, twilight, cloud cover, and trained attention, it becomes visible. Combined with the sunstone, this phenomenon may have helped confirm direction. Historians still debate whether the Norse consciously perceived this brush of light, or if they used it without naming it, another example of instinct over explanation. But it's one more hint that Viking navigation may have tapped into subtle environmental cues far beyond what written records suggest. Unusual clues emerge elsewhere. 2. One runestone found in Denmark, dating back to the Viking era, contains a symbol remarkably similar to a modern polarization cross. Some scholars believe it's mere coincidence. Others aren't so sure. Could it be a simplified sunstone diagram? A mark passed between navigators. Even more mysterious is a small wooden disc discovered in Greenland, with concentric lines etched into it and a central pinhole. The object, dubbed the Undertog artifact, was initially thought to be a simple compass or sundial. But when paired with a sunstone and used under indirect light, it performs remarkably well as a solar compass tracking solar movement even when the sun itself isn't visible. Not all scholars agree, of course. Some argue that no physical evidence clearly ties this artifact to sunstone use. The object could have had ceremonial use, or decorative, or something lost entirely to time. But that's the difficulty with ancient tools. They weren't made to be explained. They were made to work. And in that sense, the lack of written instruction might be the instruction. Navigators didn't learn from books. They learned from voyage, from wind, from watching a master rotate the stone 3 times and nod quietly, from memorizing the sun's summer path not as data, but as feeling. One old Norse poem speaks of the sky as a living road, changing with the season, hiding and revealing truths like a shifting god. In that worldview, using a stone to glimpse the sun wasn't clever, it was reverent. And perhaps that's what kept the knowledge alive, even after the sagas faded. Because while the ships eventually stopped sailing west, and the settlements fell silent and the crystals disappeared into forgotten drawers, the legacy lingered in the rhythm of light and instinct. A tradition of looking not at the sky but through it. And trusting that something would answer back. 100 miles from land, the sea is smooth as glass. No wind, no storm, only silence stretching in every direction. The crew waits, listening for cues that never come. But the navigator doesn't hesitate. He lifts the stone, slowly turns it toward the misty sky, and watches. There it is again, a flicker, an angle, a shimmer that speaks without sound. He points. The ship turns. No one questions it. The stone has spoken. In modern times, experiments have attempted to recreate this kind of moment, not just in labs, but at sea. Several research groups have tested sunstones on open water, rotating crystals under diffuse skies to simulate real Norse conditions. Each time, the results surprise skeptics. Under cloudy skies, even after sunset, the polarization of the sky remains strong enough to detect the sun's position within a few degrees. Enough to find land. Enough to stay alive. One of the most remarkable tests involved intentionally removing all known tools. No compass, no GPS, no maps. Just a sunstone and a replica Viking ship. The team didn't get lost, but while modern researchers approach this method with measuring devices and controlled environments, the Vikings had something else. Experienced. Decades, lifetimes, generations of seafaring honed the senses into tools themselves. Vikings didn't just use sunstones. They combined them with wind direction, wave angle, the cries of seabirds, the vivid hue of ocean water, and even the scent of the air. It wasn't just navigation. It was pattern recognition at its most human. One might call it a kind of low-tech synesthesia. Historians still debate whether these methods were truly reliable or simply exaggerated by later storytellers. Some say the results in controlled experiments are too dependent on operator skill to be useful across large fleets or in chaotic conditions. Others argue that's exactly what made the navigator's role so sacred. He was irreplaceable. The concept of navigation guilds has even been floated, a select class of sailors trained from boyhood to read the sea like scripture. If true, their tools might have been jealously protected. Crystals could be passed down only through apprenticeships, and if lost, forgotten completely, which may explain the strange absence of sunstones in Viking graves. Normally, precious or sacred tools would be buried with the dead. Swords, jewelry, even sled dogs have been found, but no sunstones, at least none confirmed. This absence has puzzled archaeologists. Were they simply too fragile to survive centuries underground, or were they not buried for another reason? 1. Theory: they were always meant to remain with the living, too important to entomb, too vital to let rot in the earth. And then, of course, there's the question of the Alderney crystal. This single shard of calcite, recovered from a 16th century shipwreck, ignited one of the loudest debates in maritime archaeology. Found near navigational instruments, it bore the clarity and dimensions ideal for polarization use. Critics argued it might have been cargo, but the crystal showed signs of wear edges smoothed by handling, scratches from rotation. Why carry such a stone in the captain's chest unless it served a purpose? Modern tests with this exact shard showed it could still, even today, reveal the sun's location within 3 degrees, despite water damage, despite age. For something fished off the ocean floor, that's not just good. It's incredible, and its existence proves something vital, that even long after the Viking Age ended, someone, somewhere, still trusted a crystal to find the sun. Could knowledge of sunstone navigation have persisted quietly beneath the rise of the compass? History is full of overlap. Technologies don't vanish the moment something new appears. Sailors are conservative by nature. If something works, they keep it, even if science hasn't yet caught up. Perhaps Sunstone use never really ended. Perhaps it faded quietly, like a whisper passed from sailor to sailor until one day it simply wasn't spoken again. The sea moved on, but the light remained. What's most unusual is how little it took to do so much. Not a fleet of tools, not a box of charts, not just one stone. One man, one moment of glimmer in a sky that had forgotten the sun. Snow begins to fall, not heavy, but steady, soft flakes that dissolve the horizon into a swirling curtain of white. The ship creaks. Breath clouds the air. One more glance at the sky yields nothing but pale gray. No stars, no sun. Still, the navigator turns his crystal with slow, practiced care. A glimmer appears and fades. Then it returns. The ship changes direction. Aboard, no one cheers. They've seen this before. The stone always finds its light. Among all Viking-era mysteries, few have captivated modern researchers like this because it blurs the line between hard science and oral tradition, between physics and folklore, between crystal and myth. Take the name itself, Solarstein. In Old Norse, it translates literally as sunstone, but it doesn't appear frequently, only in fragments. In tales, in passing, historians still debate whether the term described one specific crystal or many. Was it calcite, cordierite? Some suggest beryl or even smoky quartz. All of these have light-reactive properties. All were available in Norse trade routes, but only one of them, calcite, can replicate the precise optical tricks needed to locate the sun under full cloud cover. It also happens to fracture easily, which means it disappears easily. In a sense, that fragility mirrors the knowledge itself. One blow, one generation that forgets, and it vanishes. That may explain why this technology took so long to be rediscovered. Not because it failed, but because it worked so well for a time in a context so specific that no one ever thought to write it down. And when the need passed, so did the memory. But clues remained. In one particularly strange case, a medieval Icelandic manuscript described a kind of sky-reading crystal used during the Christianization of the island. The passage claimed that early bishops carried it to help plan sea routes to isolated parishes. Some scholars dismissed it as allegory, but others wondered, was this an echo of Viking practice lingering in a different form? Even more curious, some Inuit oral traditions speak of a sun shard used by foreign men who came across the water and built strange houses of grass and stone. These tales were largely ignored. But when archaeologists found Norse ruins in Newfoundland, those old whispers suddenly grew louder. Could the use of light-reading crystals have made it all the way to North America? It seems unlikely. Then again, so did Viking landfall there, until it was proven. In 1960, at Lonso Meadows, the remains of a Norse settlement were uncovered. Longhouses, iron tools, ship repairs. A Viking presence in the New World, nearly 500 years before Columbus. But the most haunting discovery wasn't what was found. It was what was missing. No compass, no map. Just orientation. The structures were built with coastal alignment, facing the sea at calculated angles, not random, not improvised. Whoever built them knew where they were, knew where home was. And that sense of direction, impossible without the sun, may have come from a sunstone. Strange, isn't it? To think that one glowing shard, smaller than a palm, could be responsible for such vast leaps across oceans. That entire expeditions may have succeeded not because of wind or luck, but because one navigator knew how to turn a crystal, theirs. A quiet humility in that, a reminder that history doesn't always hinge on grand inventions. Sometimes it turns on small things used with great care, a stone, a whisper, a glimmer of light in an otherwise hopeless sky, and then land not always land. A low fog rolls in, thick as wool, muffling the sea. The oars fall silent. The horizon disappears, not just behind clouds, but inside them. Even the sky seems to press downward, heavy with uncertainty. The world becomes a dome of gray. The navigator crouches near the bow, steady hands lifting the sunstone. One slow rotation, then another, and finally there, a pale gleam. Direction. They turn without a word. It is easy to forget that the Viking world wasn't one of endless conquest and fire. It was one of return. For every journey across the sea, there had to be a way back. The North Atlantic isn't forgiving. And yet, they crossed it again and again, not as wanderers, but as traders, settlers, explorers with purpose. That required more than bravery. It required confidence in tools no one else understood. Sunstone navigation was not an isolated trick. It was embedded in a larger network of sea lore. And it shaped more than movement, it shaped memory. One saga tells of a voyage delayed by clouded skies. The crew feared losing their heading. The navigator waited 3 days before lifting the stone. Then, one morning, he found the light and pointed them toward Greenland. The crew made landfall within a week. The story reads like fable. But the timeline fits. The geography fits. The reliance on a moment of clarity feels too precise for pure fiction. Historians still debate whether this kind of account reflects reality or narrative art, but those same sagas also describe currents, winds, and sea ice in terms confirmed by modern oceanographers. If they were accurate about the water, why not the sky? More intriguingly, the shape of Viking ships suggests the importance of direction. Their longships weren't just made for battle. They were built for distance. Long and narrow, with flexible hulls that flexed with waves, they could navigate shallows and open water alike. But such design demanded precise guidance. A ship off by even 10 degrees could miss landfall entirely. In that context, the Sunstone wasn't just useful. It was essential. And unlike a compass, it never failed due to magnetic interference. No recalibration. No deviation. It either gleamed or it didn't. Single quotes T.1 often overlooked fact. The Viking expansion peaked between 800 and 1100 C, a period of particularly cold and unstable climate in the North Atlantic, more fog, more storms, shorter daylight. These are the worst conditions for open water navigation, and yet this is when the Norse were most active at sea. Coincidence? Or did they develop a tool specifically to master that weather? Sunstone theory gained serious momentum when scientists realized this very point. Viking navigation worked better when the sun was hidden. That's not just unusual. That's strategic. Add to this another curious pattern. Settlements like those in Iceland and Greenland are located precisely where the sun's polarization pattern is strongest, where the atmosphere creates the clearest contrast between filtered and unfiltered light. especially during long summer twilight hours. They didn't just sail into the unknown. They sailed where their tools worked best. In 2016, an independent sailing team attempted to recreate one of the North Sea routes using only reconstructed longships, period-appropriate gear, and calcite stones. Their route followed the old line: Norway to the Faroes, then to Iceland, then Greenland. Each leg was separated by storms, fog, and clouded skies. They made it. No digital aid, no modern compass, just a stone and the ability to interpret that sky's silent code. Strangely, it wasn't the technology that challenged the crew. It was trust. Trusting a rock more than instinct. Trusting that shimmer over what their eyes told them. But once they did, the rest followed. The sea grew less mysterious. It simply became something to listen to. This trust, over centuries, would evolve into tradition. Not superstition, not blind belief, but a quiet faith in repetition. The same light, the same turn of the wrist, the same glow, even when all else failed. In the end, it wasn't the sword that gave the Vikings their reach. It was the stone. Waves roll with an eerie stillness. No sails raised, no oars pulled. The crew huddles, waiting. The sky hangs low, a dome of clouds so thick that even shadows vanish. Still, one figure stands at the bow. He lifts the sunstone once more, not hurried, not guessing, just watching. A turn, a shimmer, a confirmation. With a quiet nod, he steps back. The ship moves again. The sea has answered. Centuries before compasses became common, before even the term latitude meant anything to a sailor, the Vikings were plotting courses across thousands of miles. Not with charts, but with stone. Sun, memory, and sky. Today, it seems impossible. But the evidence keeps building. One overlooked element is rhythm. Viking voyages weren't improvised. They followed consistent seasonal windows. Typically, ships would leave Norway or Iceland in late spring or early summer. These months offered something uniquely useful: long daylight hours, but not bright daylight. Much of the light came through low angles, haze, or partial cloud, exactly the conditions in which sunstones shine. Historians still debate whether this timing was accidental or deliberate. But the overlap between sailing season and solar polarization conditions is too perfect to ignore. Like the sunstone, it reflects a kind of unconscious engineering. They didn't need to name the science. They just needed it to work. Modern tests show that calcite performs best during these conditions. The refraction angle grows clearer, the polarized bands sharper, and the light gradient more stable. In winter, useless. In high summer, reliable. The sunstones weren't just tools, they were seasonal instruments. This might explain another odd pattern. No sunstone has ever been found preserved in full alongside shipwrecks from colder months, and voyages in later autumn were often described in sagas as risky or blind. Could it be that, without proper light, even the stone lost its voice? Possibly, which leads to a deeper truth. Sunstone navigation wasn't a one-tool solution. It was part of a choreography. It required timing, sky conditions, observation. This isn't the story of a magical crystal. It's the story of a culture tuned to its environment with almost unnatural precision. Even stranger are parallels with other ancient seafaring traditions. In the Pacific, Polynesian wayfinders navigated vast oceans using the direction of swells, the flight paths of birds, and color variations in ocean water. They memorized star paths, constellations that rose in fixed sequences depending on direction. They, too, trusted patterns over maps. They, too, had tools that never wrote their names in history books. One might ask, why are there no sunstones in southern Europe? Why didn't other seafarers develop similar tools? The answer lies in the sky itself. Polarized light behaves differently depending on latitude. Near the equator, it's more diffuse, less distinct, harder to detect. But near the Arctic Circle, the bands grow sharper. The window of visibility opens wider. That's why Vikings may have discovered what others never could, because only they could see it, even among the Norse. Though this wasn't for everyone, the navigator held a rare role. He was not just a sailor. He was part scientist, part priest, a custodian of direction. His tools were few, but his understanding ran deep. The crew followed not because of rank, but because he knew, not just the sea, but the sun, the stone, the secret voice in the sky. In one saga, a navigator prays before lifting the stone, not to ask for magic, but to thank the world for its signs. Then he lifts it, watches, and speaks. Odd? Maybe. Or maybe it was a ritual born of repetition. You turn the stone the same way. You wait for the same shimmer. You trust that the sky, once again, will tell you where to go. And it does. Mist curls low across the deck. The world is muffled, gray on all sides. There is no thunder, no wind, just stillness. But not peace. In this emptiness, direction fades. And in the silence, the navigator lifts the sunstone once again. He turns it slowly, angling it not with hope, but with memory. A shimmer slides across the crystal, not a beam. Just a soft glow, enough. The ship turns. And once again, forward. As Viking voyages grew longer, their reliance on direction became more delicate. The routes to Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland weren't single sails. They were broken into phases, segments between known points, small islands, landmarks, a series of invisible waypoints in an invisible sea. Without the sunstone, those segments blurred. This is why Viking sea travel was almost never solo. Ships often sailed in loose clusters, not to show force, but to share knowledge. If one ship lost its way, another might still carry the course. The navigator became not just a guide, but a lighthouse. Historians still debate whether each ship had its own crystal, or if one navigator guided multiple vessels. In some sagas, a single sky reader is placed on the lead ship, issuing course corrections by signal or song. Others hint that each captain trained in sun reading as part of their leadership. It's hard to say. But what's clear is that a system existed, because failure wasn't tolerated. The sea did not forgive the lost. Oddly, this may explain why Viking raids along European coasts were so sudden and so precise. Many monasteries describe the longships as appearing out of nowhere. But they didn't. They arrived on schedule from specific angles, often around dawn or twilight, exactly when the sunstone would have been most useful. Could it be that this terrifying efficiency, this ability to strike and vanish, was less about violence and more about navigation? Possibly. And that raises a strange idea. What if the greatest Norse weapon wasn't the axe, but the ability to arrive where no one expected? Another layer of this story lies not in stone, but in language. Old Norse had over 150 terms for light, conditions at sea, words for twilight, for the silver glow before rain, for the green haze after sunset. This vocabulary, rich and specific, reveals a culture that watched the sky closely, daily, obsessively, because the sky wasn't decoration. It was a compass. Some words describe light so faint that it's barely perceptible. A ghost glow, or a swan's breath of gold. To most, this is poetry. To a navigator, it's instruction. These phrases don't describe beauty. They describe visibility, contrast, polarization conditions. In a sense, the navigator carried not just a sunstone, but an entire language of the sky, and perhaps this is what modern minds struggle to grasp. Not the stone, not the voyages, but the worldview. A people who didn't just look at weather, but listened to it. Who treated cloud cover not as an obstacle, but as a map. Who didn't fear fog, but navigated through it with tools invisible to most. And somehow, it worked. One last theory deserves mention. A few scholars believe that sunstone use extended beyond navigation, that it shaped timekeeping, ritual, even religion. The alignment of certain burial mounds and sacred sites in Iceland and Norway mirror solar paths detectable only through polarized light. Were these intentional? Coincidence? Or did the crystal influence more than just the sea? We may never know, but one thing remains certain. When the Vikings sailed west toward the cold, the unknown, the edge of the world, they didn't do it with blind faith. They did it with a stone, and a sky that, even when silent, still showed them the way. Twilight deepens. The sea has turned a shade darker. Somewhere between slate and ink, there's no sun. Not even a suggestion of it, but the navigator doesn't flinch. The sunstone rests between his fingers, its edges worn smooth by salt and time. A slow rotation, a narrowing gleam, a silent signal. He doesn't need to speak. The tiller shifts. The ship slides into the unknown with quiet certainty. This is the legacy of repetition. By the late Viking Age, navigation had become more than skill. It had become inheritance. Knowledge passed from father to son, from one winter voyage to the next. And at the heart of it, tools that left no writing, but shaped history just the same. One of the strangest cases supporting sunstone navigation doesn't come from Scandinavia at all, but from a 15th century German manual. In it, a solar stone is briefly mentioned as an aid to sailors who follow the light even through clouded skies. No diagrams, no details, but the wording is oddly familiar. Too familiar that it echoes the Norse sagas almost word for word. Historians still debate whether this was an independent rediscovery or a fragment of Viking tradition that drifted south. Either way, it proves the concept had reach, that it might have lived on longer than most imagine. And then there's the ship design itself. The clinker-built hulls of Viking longships flexed with waves, absorbing motion instead of resisting it. They were light enough to carry over land, but strong enough to cross oceans. And most importantly, they were fast, capable of 10 to 15 knots under full sail. That speed mattered, because to maintain heading in open ocean, a ship must stay ahead of changes in sky and light. If the clouds shift too quickly, if the sun drops too low, the navigator loses the cue. A slower ship misses that window. A Viking ship didn't dot. It's another way the stone and the vessel worked in harmony. But what happened when the stone failed? That's the part often left out. There were no backups, no safety nets. If cloud cover thickened beyond polarization limits, or if the crystal cracked, the ship was left to instinct. Sailors would fall back on wave patterns, wind direction, or even seabird paths, many of which fly inland at dusk to nest. Some sagas mention feeding ravens from the deck, then releasing one into the sky. If it returned, land was far. If it flew, onward follow it maybe, but reliable enough to appear again and again. Another curious detail: the emotional tone of these stories. Navigators weren't portrayed as mystical seers or divine heroes. They were calm, patient, often quiet. Their strength wasn't in drama, it was in observation. The sagas describe them more like craftsmen than warriors, humble, unshaken, and always watching the sky. This tone suggests respect, not for the tool, but for the discipline, because Sunstone navigation wasn't flashy. It didn't involve stars or compasses spinning like magic. It involved waiting, adjusting, trusting the smallest shift of light. That's a different kind of courage, the kind that doesn't demand praise, just a steady hand. Even the term navigator might be misleading. In Old Norse, the closest concept was lysgumer, the wayshower. Not the boss, not the captain, just the one who points forward. That says everything, and it's perhaps the most Viking detail of all. Because in the end, Sunstone navigation wasn't about conquest. It wasn't even about discovery. It was about coming home. Finding Greenland again, finding Iceland again, finding that cold black ribbon in the ocean that meant this is the way back, and the stone. It was never magic. Just light, bent. Reflected. Remembered. The sea is nearly still. Only the creak of wood and the hush of oars dipping into water break the silence. The navigator doesn't look around, doesn't need to. He watches the sky, though no sun shines. The sunstone rests against his palm like a memory. A slow turn, a brief flash, then calm again. He lowers it, and the ship holds its course, drawn forward by something no one else can see. By now, the idea of sunstone navigation has traveled far beyond theory. It's become a bridge between the mythical and the measurable, between old world instinct and new world science. Yet there's a strange silence in written history. No Viking saga dedicates more than a few words to this crystal. No saga explains how to use it. No runestone details its secrets. It's as if the knowledge existed in a different realm, spoken, shown, practiced, but never penned. Historians still debate whether this was oversight or intention. One theory suggests secrecy. Navigators might have guarded their methods as closely as warriors guarded battle plans. After all, knowledge was power. And in an age where direction meant survival, the fewer who understood the sky, the safer the ship. Others believe it was simply cultural. The Norse recorded stories of honor, revenge, and fate, but rarely practical instruction. There are no saga chapters on how to build a longship either. Yet those ships were built, again and again, by hands that learned through watching. Sunstone used likely followed the same path. And in that silence, the tradition became vulnerable. When the Viking Age ended, the long voyages stopped. The navigators grew fewer, Trade routes changed. Christianity spread, bringing new calendars, new rituals, and less reliance on sun-guided seafaring. Compasses slowly appeared. With each generation, fewer remembered the shimmer in the stone, until one day, no one did, but the legacy didn't vanish completely. The alignment of Norse buildings, the symbols etched into old navigation tools, the fragmented talis of sky-reading stones, the near-mythical accounts of ships sailing under clouded skies without a single wrong turn. And finally, the science. In recent decades, researchers across disciplines, optics, archaeology, atmospheric physics have recreated these effects again and again, not just in theory, but in practice. Under cloud cover, at sea, with nothing but stone and patience, and always they find the same result. It works, not flawlessly, not universally, but reliably enough to guide a ship across open water when every other method fails. That's more than coincidence. That's knowledge, the kind that lives quietly in a navigator's hand. One curious parallel has emerged with Arctic cultures. Some Inuit tribes, known for their exceptional orientation in low-visibility environments, describe a sky memory, a sensation of knowing direction even when no landmark is visible. They use snowdrift angles, wind patterns, even the color of clouds to navigate with eerie precision. Though unrelated, the similarity is striking. Both groups depended on subtle cues. Both learned to move through a world that refused to show itself easily. And both passed their knowledge not through books, but through presence. That's what makes the Sunstone more than a relic. It's not just a crystal. It's a reminder that the world offers quiet signals if someone has the patience to listen. The Vikings did. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to go further, reach further, come back again, even now on replica ships crossing the old sea routes. The test continues. A hand lifts a crystal skyward. Clouds roll past, light bends. The shimmer flickers for just a breath, and that's enough. The ship turns. Forward. Always forward. The wind rises again, soft and steady, pushing across the waves like an ancient breath. The sky is no brighter. The clouds have thickened into a single sheet of silver. Still the ship presses on. The navigator holds the crystal once more, eyes narrowed, not in doubt but in habit. A slow rotation, a quiet shift, a knowing pause. The shimmer appears not bright, but clear. And for the last time, he nods. In a world before instruments, this was the pinnacle of precision. There's something almost haunting about it. The idea that one of the most advanced navigational tools of its time left no blueprints, no diagrams, no scrolls. Only fragments, clues hidden in folklore, a few artifacts, a crystal buried in a wreck, and above all, an absence that speaks louder than any presence. Sunstone navigation is as much about what's not said as what is. Historians still debate whether its use was widespread or elite, whether every ship carried one or only the best-trained navigators, whether the skill was common or sacred. But all agree on one point. Viking seamanship was no accident. Their voyages to the Faroes, Iceland, Greenland, and beyond required reliable navigation. The distances were too great, the margin for error too small. Something guided them, something real. And the Sunstone fits that role with uncanny precision. Oddly, the deeper researchers look into Viking navigation, the more modern the technique begins to feel, not because it used complex instruments, but because it depended on data. Raw sensory input filtered through practiced observation. Today, a sailor might track barometric pressure and wind speed. A Viking tracked the color of the horizon, the flight path of a gull, the shimmer on a crystal held at arm's length. Not superstition, not guesswork. Just an unbroken chain of seeing, remembering, adjusting. They didn't call it science, but it was. One final image remains perhaps the most striking. A lone longship, far from shore, sails silently through heavy mist. No compass swings, no map flutters. Only the navigator stands exposed at the bow, one hand steady, the other turning a small, translucent crystal. The ship veers, gently, not much. Just enough dot and hundreds of miles ahead, past cloud and wave. And time, a jagged coastline waits, icy cliffs, stone beaches, smoke rising from turf houses where others already wait with fire and fish. They will not be surprised when the ship arrives. They always knew he'd find the way, because the navigator carries not just a tool, but a promise to reach home, to bring others with him, and to trust, again and again, that even when the sun disappears, the light remains in the crystal, in the sky, in the memory of those who knew how to look.